All right, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the inspiring talk I listened to, which somehow brought me back to the 80s and to all life that has happened here in between, and the beginning of Tutke and all that. But I stick to my plan nevertheless and speak. I don't have a formal presentation, but I have a PowerPoint which I should remember to share with you now. Yes, and please tell me if you can't hear me or if you can't see me. And I'm just going to read the first very beginning, because I had the ambitious plan that I would write something, because this idea of collaboration and networking is such a challenging topic for me. So, but of course I never wrote anything except the introduction, and then I have just a list of things to consider. But the beginning, when I agreed to speak about collaboration and networking, I thought I would approach the question from my current perspective of a more or less independent artist and artist researcher, rather than from an institutional angle. After leaving theater directing at the turn of the millennium, more than 20 years ago, I think of myself as an individual artist, working alone without a crew. But this is, of course, not the whole truth. Whatever we do, we cannot not collaborate. And however independent you imagine yourself to be, you are dependent, oh so dependent on many, many, many others, both human and non-human. To use the much quoted words of Donna Haraway, I quote, "We become with each other or not at all," end of quote. Thus, I thought I would begin by speaking about collaboration as I understand it today, with a focus on the main collaborators in my recent project, Meetings with Remarkable and Unremarkable Trees. And the new project I'm embarking on right now, or actually started at the beginning of this year, Pondering with Pines, and namely the trees I perform together with, and perhaps also the video camera on tripod that is my main technological tool and collaborator tool, with quite a lot of agency in my work. On second thought, I decided to begin at the other end with networking, because focusing on some existing networks among humans might be more interesting for you and for our discussion. Thus, I began listing what networks I belong to or have actively participated in recently. And on my website, I list networks and collaborations in 3 groups. A little bit weird, but I started from what was there. So first of all, a group of profiles on websites, more like membership organizations, I guess. Secondly, research projects. And thirdly, working groups and networks. And now when I go through this, I realize, of course, my networks, for historical reasons, are very much in performing arts and not so much in dance, for instance. So, but you could imagine your own networks here. So among the profiles on websites, I have listed them in this order. And the first one is the research catalog, which many of you might be familiar with, which is actually a platform, online platform and database, which is free and open for everybody to use, which is maintained by Society for Artistic Research. I'm also a member of Society for Artistic Research for historical reasons, but that is not necessary. So you can sign up and use the research catalog for free, if you yeah. And that's a main main network in some sense, although it's not a proper network in the sense that I would engage with the people. There's several thousand people using the research catalog now, but anyway. And the second one listed is the Distribution Center for Finnish Media Art, Ave-Arki, which is, I hear, in international comparison, quite an extraordinary membership organization, because it really is a distribution center for media art, but it's mainly actually for media art, which is like circulating on film festivals and so on. So not so much for installation work, but anyway. And then the third link is to the Finnish Artists Association, which is more like, for those who know Finnish, it's like the matrikkeli. So it's important, if you're a visual artist, it's important to have your name in this catalog, because it somehow proves that you're a professional artist. But it's a very strange profile, because you cannot update it yourself, or you have to pay to get the password. So there's a lot of broken links, and because of this, I realized I have to update that page. So I've tried that. And then the two academic networks that you might be familiar with, Academia Edu and ResearchGate, which are actually not for artists, but for scholars, but which are very useful for, on the one hand, publishing your own research, if it's open access, or the drafts you can publish if it's not open access publications, and also to get articles from researchers. So sometimes I get, for instance, somebody asked, could you send me the full text of this and this text? I need it for my dissertation or something like that. So although they are commercial networks, very much commercial networks, I still think they do their job. So what is not included, I realized when I looked at the website, is the link to MUARU, which is an artist association. Mu means other, so it's all the other artists except the ones who paint, the sculptures, or the graphic artists. So all the other ones were the other ones, and that's why Mu was started in the 80s. And there is something called the Performance Bank, which I used to be a member of, but they have now renovated. It's more actively like a website where they distribute their sell performances, and I don't have performances to sell in that way. And also, it's not there is no, like the members of MUARU don't have a special profile page on MUARU's website. They just have links to their own websites and so on. So the second main group of collaborations or networks is research projects, and they are listed here in the order with the latest on top. So Wandering with Pines, and then the one that I'm still working on, and here now a small moment of advertisement for those of you who are in Helsinki. Please go to Gallery Forum Box. The exhibition with some of the works, a few of the works in Meetings with Remarkable and Unremarkable Trees, are there as part of the exhibition there until Sunday. So next Sunday, last day. The exhibition, or it's a collaboration with 3 artists, but my part is called Meetings with Spruces and Birches. And then the most recent collaboration, and these are like, both of these are mainly collaborating with trees, but genuine human collaboration was the Academy of Finland funded project, How to Do Things with Performance, which was linked to Tutke together with Hanna Järvinen, Tero Nauha, and Pilvi Porkola, and which is now finished, but we still have publications that we work on, and it's still going on. And then the project which is finished, which took place in 2018 and 19 in Stockholm, Performing with Plants. So I still have some contacts because I was working in Stockholm then. I still have some contacts with some people in Stockholm and teach a little bit there and so on. So what is missing of the research projects was project called Esitystutkimuksen työpajahanke Performance Studies Development Workshops with Helena Saarikoski and Taina Riikonen, funded by Finnish Cultural Foundation 2013 and 14, and the ensuing network that we started, Esitystutkimuksen verkosto, the Finnish Performance Studies Network, which still has a blog, but which is very much dormant. So an example of a network that was somehow created in the moment of enthusiasm, gathering people from different fields, also outside the arts, or mainly outside the arts actually, who were interested in performance studies in the Finnish context, but which has now dwindled, and I could say that nobody of us has really taken responsibility of it. So yeah. All right, so the third group on the website is the proper topic for today's working groups and networks. That's what it's titled. And I didn't have it, but because of this assignment to look at networks and collaboration, I added it there. It's very typical that your most important networks you don't even think of as networks. So at the moment, it's one of the most important networks I'm engaged with is the editorial board of JAR, or Journal for Artistic Research, where I've been, which is the editor-in-chief is Michael Schwab, and I have been with the group from 2010 when it was started. And it's very funny because I'm the oldie there, because there is a lot of new people coming in and so on. But that's my main, or let's say that's the network that I'm in contact with regularly. And then the other, the only working group that I'm a co-convener of at the moment, and that I take responsibility for, is this working group for artistic research at Performance Studies International. Some of you might have received the call for contributions for next year's conference, online conference, via the Tutke email, because I sent it there. And I could tell you much about that. It started, I went to the first PSI conference sent by Bent Paavola in 2001 and was like horrified. What kind of fair is this where they're not? Well, that's a long story, but they had something called the Artists Committee run by Louis Weaver. And then Ray Langenbach, who was formerly a professor at Helsinki also, he was then the chair of the Artists Committee. But when he left, then Johanna Householder, a Canadian performance artist, and me, we decided that no, let's make it a working group. And then Bruce Barton, who is also from Canada, but a different type of performance, he said he would be interested in creating a working group for artistic research. And then I said, no, let's make this, let's transform this artist committee to the working group for artistic research instead of starting a new one. And so now we three convene that. And that's a site which I think is interesting, although it's difficult because to collaborate sometimes, and we meet only once a year, but we experiment with various ways of how can you make a conference more suitable for artists sharing work in different ways. And now we're trying to do that online. Another similar type of working group, which started even earlier, is part of the International Federation for Theatre Research. And that's the PAR working group, or Performances Research Working Group. I'm still a member, but I was a convener with Jonathan Heron and Emma Mian for 4 years, some years ago. But this group was started already in 2004 by Jacqueline Martin and Bas Kershaw, scholars who saw the need to include artistic practices in scholarly methodology. And since then, that working group has developed a mode of working collaboratively. So we have sort of workshops at conferences and so on, although International Federation for Theatre Research is very much traditional theatre research, the PAR working group within that context has been quite important. Then I'm also part of the Performance Philosophy Network, but more like a passive member, just hanging around sometimes. But then I also have a link to Harakka Island Artist House. Most of the website is in Finnish. Why is that? That's my art school. I got a studio on this island in the artist house there, which is maintained by the Cultural Center of Helsinki in 1997, and have been there since then, luckily. And that in that context, I somehow learned, in Finnish you say kantapään kautta, what is expected of a visual artist or a designer or an illustrator or a craftsperson. What type of work? How do you communicate? How do you work together? How do you make exhibitions? How do you share duties and responsibilities and so on? It's a type of laboratory situation because there are spaces where you can make things, but it's also been a different, it's been a learning environment on a grassroots level, because my training is in performing arts, where we have very specific ideas of collaboration and organization and how work is done and what is professional and what is unprofessional and blah, blah. But it's also, how should I say, it's a good, or I'll talk about it later, but this, when Marike spoke about the local context, so this is as local as it can get, but it's really a good way of being good. So what is missing from all this? It's, for instance, something that I've been part of, sort of passively, Contemporary Performance Network, and I still can't log in to the website there. They've moved and my IP is marked as spam. I don't know why. Then the Finnish Theatre Research Society, and that's very funny. But Finland is a small country, so the Finnish Theatre Research Society includes performing arts in a broad scale, like also dance and circus and performance art. It's an artistic research, so they have publications almost yearly. So I've been part of that. I'm also a member of Kulttuurin tutkimuksen seura, the Society for Cultural Studies in Finland, but that's my main job is there just to pay for the membership, and the same goes for Finnish Society for Aesthetics. I know Dennis is active there, but I haven't been active, but I always think that I should become active. And then a new society, which I've become a member only recently, and that is the BioArt Society, because it's a very active and interesting organization in Finland. And I'm not making bioart. I've never been a member before, because I don't think that it's sort of my home association, but I'm closer to bioart than cultural studies, I suppose. So now I'm a member, and because yeah. So sometimes with networks you cannot be too picky. Let's put it like this. So I just then I thought that, well, is there some past networks that have been interesting, and I just went to my CV and looked. So the recent years, it's just now finished. I was a member of the Committee for Artistic Research at the Swedish Research Council in Sweden. And that was, of course, a great position to see the development of artistic research in Sweden. Also another important network, which is now finished, and I really sort of feel that how can I do without that network, has been the editorial board of Ruukku, Studies in Artistic Research. Ruukku is the Finnish translation for JAR, so it's like a similar online open access journal for artistic research. And then I was a member of the board of the Norwegian Artistic Research Program, and as a remainder from that, I'm still teaching one seminar every second year for the doctoral candidates in that program. So there are always all these networks you sometimes belong to, they stay with you in some sense. And then here's listed the PAR working group. Yeah, just the time when I was a co-convener. Now, I haven't. This was the starting point. What is on my website? But of course, there are lots of informal networks, and they are often more important for research than the formal ones. Although I must say that staying with groups like the Performance as Research Working Group at IFTR, even though none of the people in that working group are interested in actually the same things that I am. So I'm very much there also in the margin, but still those discussions have been hugely important. And for instance, one of those members invited me to Johannesburg for the residency and so on. So the contacts result to things. But informal networks are super important, like reading groups. We have a performative writing study circle, and I also participate in since 1 year in a climate change study group with people I've never met in life before, and it's just a reading group. And I've come to read and with four very different people, and that's one of the most how should I say, greatest learning experiences. So reading, not only reading about climate change from broad spectrum, but having these conversations with people from all walks of life. And you can imagine, of course, then I try now with these plant interests, I try to be, for instance, part of mailing lists. There is somebody called Joella Jacobs in California who keeps a mailing list about environmental humanities and plants and so on. There I get to know about webinars, and you can think in your own field what mailing list would be important. There is, for instance, in artistic research in performing arts, there is PARIP, from the PARIP conferences in the beginning of 2000, there's still a mailing list. Then there is a live art and performance art mailing list, and probably other similar type. Then the whole big issue, I didn't list it here, but social media. I'm not an expert on social media, but there is a lot of information shared also in an academic sense, and also in terms of research, and also in terms of professional opportunities via Facebook or Twitter or whatever. I also started to use blogs to publish field notes in 2011, have been doing that since then. Some of them are linked to my personal website. So I really recommend investigating the use of blogs, not so much in terms of conversation and networking, but as a research tool. Yeah, okay. Now, I've given you example of different types of networks, so or collaboration, so how to structure these various types. On one hand, we could think of like individual approach, so you belong to various networks as a member, networks or associations, and then of course there can be an institutional approach. Networks are tools for creating a research environment, like symposia, publications, summer schools. The first thing we did when we started Tutke was to create Karpa, which is still ongoing, yeah. And Ruku, the journal, and SAR, the Summer Academy, well, later Nivel, the publications. So creating networks and opportunities for people to meet and share their research, but also to plan publications and so on. That's the basic ingredient of a research environment. But of course, the main collaboration takes place in research projects. And I haven't had so much experience of that, except now for how to do things with performance. And already writing a research application, wow, that's a collaboration. That you can call it collaboration. But of course, then as a research project, we organized seminars and invited people, and so the networking is somehow multiplied. But then the last dimension is based on site and location, like the studio on Harak Island, and why not Tutke? I mean, I began doctoral studies in 1992, and here I am still hanging around. So yeah, it's important to have your home bases, and you can have more than one, but it's of course almost always important to reach out as well. So to repeat some basic distinctions: institutional networks or interest groups, formal networks and informal networks, international, national or local. I mean, it's not or, they're and, international, national and local. And then the question of discipline-based or multidisciplinary networks. For instance, JAR editorial board, it's very much multidisciplinary, whereas the performance research and artistic research working groups are more discipline-based, even though they're more like methodologically oriented. And then the question of long-standing transgenerational networks or temporary networks. So I'm sort of stuck with a few of these conferences that I go to and so on, because after a while, the people become like old friends. So the thinking can be developed because you have some trajectory. But of course, some networks are temporary. They're needed for a time, so there is no need to fetishize them. Yeah, then to end with, or not to end with yet, but just to think of, what are the networks that one takes responsibility for and maintains or returns to, and which are the networks that one follows sporadically? So you can hang around with some networks, and some networks you know that they need you. Like the artistic research working group of PSI, I remember the conference in Copenhagen in 2008, I was sitting alone in the room with Johanna Hausholder on Skype, and that was the working group. And then I decided, no, this is not how it's going to be, and started to do something about it and so on. All right, and what are the core groups that are crucial for one's research? And what are the groups that sometimes feel irrelevant but can enlarge one's views? So ideally, when you do research, you hope to find those people who are interested in the very same things. But for instance, and slowly I notice it, slowly you find them. But sometimes the groups where you are not so much devoted to the core concerns, but more on the margins, can be very useful in opening up your thinking. And then the third question: if you cannot find the right working group or network, how can you create one? And this goes back to Marike's beginning. I mean, what self-organizing? Yeah. To end with, I have just to show you a little bit of images. So 4 images of my current collaborators: a pine in Kaivopuistopark in Helsinki, a pine in Nobelparken in Stockholm, and then a reclining pine in Helsinki that I talked to, and then a pine in Liljaskogen that I talked to. And these I've had only one conversation. So this is in Kaivopuisto. I met this guy this morning. This is in Stockholm. And this is the one I talked to. And here is one I tried to talk to. I couldn't find in Stockholm a tree that I could climb to sit in. All right. Thank you for your attention, and I hope we can continue the discussion.